Hi everybody, episode 3 of the Gilded Age. I got my little clicker thing. Woohoo! In the meantime, I have been struggling with trying to make this camera work perfectly, and so weirdly I have it positioned in my lamp that was in the back of the room. Hopefully this will work. Anyway, when we left off, we were talking about Cleveland and then Harrison and then Cleveland. Cleveland's the one that had the daughter/wife and the baby Ruth. Anyway, we are finishing up with the Gilded Age presidents. Keep in mind the Gilded Age presidents start with Grant. You guys memorize Lincoln, Johnson, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland. Lincoln is Civil War. Johnson was Reconstruction. So the Gilded Age officially starts with Grant. So just to review, you have to know that Grant was very ethical, very moral, but everybody around him was corrupt. Remember his father-in-law who lived with him from the Deep South? He was corrupt. The credit mobilier scandal where the vice president and congressman took stocks for free and made a lot of money, that was all around him. And so there was corruption around him, but he was not corrupt. So then Grant, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant, Hayes, was Compromise of 1877 and the Great Betrayal, and they took all of the troops out of the South. And Tilden did not get to be president. He should have been the one you memorized. Lincoln, Johnson, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur. Arthur is the one that took presidency after Grant, and it turns out that he was a fine president, not remarkable one way or another. Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, we talked about Cleveland, and then now Harrison. Okay. So these guys, that's their rank. Nobody was incredibly important. So what you have to know about the Gilded Age presidents is one, that you don't really have to know about the Gilded Age presidents. For my test, you'll have to know about Gilded Age presidents a little bit, but mostly probably about the Compromise of 1877, credit mobilier scandal, otherwise not really. And then after that we start with McKinley and the progressive presidents. You can write this down. The progressive presidents are Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. Teddy, Taft, and Wilson are the progressive presidents, and they start off the 20th century with us after McKinley gets assassinated. So Harrison, again, pretty much remarkable for his unremarkability. Harrison's the last one to have a beard. Everybody else had beards for all of that time. Otherwise, not really much. Okay, Harrison, here's what you have to know. In 1890, Harrison passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, hoping to reduce the power of corporate monopolies. When you think of corporate monopolies, you should be thinking of Carnegie, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Stanford, Swift and Armour. I was telling my students today about Pullman. George Pullman is in Illinois, and he made the Pullman Palace car. Think of Jay-Z and Beyonce on a very private jet, a big, beautiful private jet, or Donald Trump's big, beautiful private jet. The way those things are decked out, that's what they would have done with the Pullman Palace cars. All the very, very rich people had their own train car, and it was like their home and this gorgeous, beautiful, gold-plated type thing. Everybody else was sitting in train cars where just a bunch of them were all crammed in the train cars, and it cost them a lot of money for them to be able to be on those palace cars, or on those cars. But the rich people had Pullman Palace cars. So what you have to know about the Sherman Antitrust Act is it didn't work. The Sherman Antitrust Act was ineffective. It was not effective. It's only when we get to Taft, I believe, that we have the Clayton Antitrust Act. And again, Taft is a progressive, so he's on the left side. Even though they are Republicans, they are still progressives, and progressives mean they have progressive policies that are more similar to Democrats today. And so the Sherman Antitrust Act, ineffective, and then later the Clayton Antitrust Act, I feel like it's like 1913 or something like that, that is effective and makes a dent against some of these corporate bigwigs like the captains of industry. So keep in mind, captains of industry versus robber barons. Captains of industry and robber barons are talking about the exact same people. Rockefeller with oil, Carnegie with steel, Stanford and Vanderbilt with trains, Swift and Armour with meat packing. All of these guys are captains of industry. Like, for example, Stanford and Vanderbilt built trains all over the country. We have the first transcontinental railroad in 1869 in Promontory Point, Utah, with that gold spike. But we then, within 10 years, had another five total, I think, transcontinental railroads. And so here's the thing you should know is, though, that all of those workers, they died of heat exhaustion, they worked ridiculous hours, they got paid very little money. So as far as the people on the left, the laborers, are concerned, they are robber barons. Vanderbilt and Stanford are robber barons. However, they're captains of industry, and I have to admit that, even though I'm here on the left, I have to admit that, because they literally created the country that we have. They made us a world power. The fact that we have the Industrial Revolution in steel making made us end up being a world power. So as much as I hate to admit it, they were terrible and horrible for the working man and for the poor and for immigrants, but they really made us a world power. By the time we get to World War I, we are one of the biggest powers on the earth because of this Industrial Revolution and because of all of the captains of industry, even though they were terrible for normal people. Okay, the McKinley tariff boosted rates to 48.4%, the highest levels yet. That was in 1890, 48% tariffs. So here's what you have to know. A tariff is a fee that we put on imports coming into our country. So that if somebody's selling pencils in our country for $1, and then the Chinese pencils are coming in and they're only 50 cents, we put up a tariff that would be like 50 cents so that they would be the same price as the pencils that you could buy here in the country. So tariffs are to try to protect the people that we have in our country that make pencils or make wheat or whatever it is, that product that we make here in the country. Here's the problem though. We aren't the only one that put up tariffs. So if we put up tariffs against other countries who want to import their goods into our country, they do the same thing to us. And so all of our people from Kansas and from the Plain States in California that all are trying to sell their wheat and their corn and all of their crops and even meat, all of that stuff, all of those people can't sell their stuff to China because China threw up big tariffs against us. As it turns out, currently, Trump has very, very high tariffs in place, and indeed, it's very bad for our farmers because they can't sell their crops in China or other places because they have high tariffs against us since we put high tariffs against them. So we're currently in a tariff war against China as we speak, and it has been terrible for the farmers who can't get rid of their crops. This past weekend, crops got destroyed in some sort of, big storm that's 70-mile-per-hour winds. So it was really bad. Farmers were devastated by tariffs. Republicans lost many seats in the next election because they were absolutely devastated by these huge high tariffs, the McKinley tariffs. Okay, so you have to know about the Industrial Revolution. Some of you remember from world history that the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain with textiles. Textiles are clothes, and they started in the 1750s. You guys all remember about the working conditions for the poor and for children and people working 12, 14, 16 hours. Same thing for us. In the Gilded Age, we were doing that. All of our people were working all of these crazy hours in terrible conditions. You get your arm cut off in a meat packing plant. Oh well. If rats fell into the meat that they were storing up in the meat packing plant, oh well. They packaged it up and sold it anyway. Oh well. Rats fell in. No big deal. So the Industrial Revolution, you have to know, is basically the 1880s is the strength of it. But so the Gilded Age is the second Industrial Revolution, and it equals steel. Steel, steel, steel. We're making buildings. We're making factories. We're making factory machines. We're making train tracks. We're making train cars. All sorts of things, all made out of steel. All over the world, the second Industrial Revolution is happening, and it revolves around the making of steel. So the making of steel was the result of the Bessemer steelmaking process. And I think we're going to have a picture of it soon. But the Bessemer steelmaking process was in England, and Carnegie went over to learn about the Bessemer steelmaking process, came back, and that's it. FYI, the Pittsburgh Steelers, Carnegie's big steel plant was in Homestead, which is just outside of Pittsburgh. And that's why the Pittsburgh Steelers are called the Pittsburgh Steelers, is because of Carnegie Steel. So, rural districts are being studded with villages. The villages are growing into cities. The cities are stretching out long arms of suburbs. You have to know that when the trains first went out, that trains would decide where they were going to put their train tracks. They don't go just straight across the country. Sometimes they dipped down and picked up that town or that city, and then this time they went up high and they went around that city because they were mad at whoever that person was that was the person in charge of that city, and they didn't want to build their trains along that city because they knew that would benefit them. Sometimes they'd have to be paid off to build their trains along the cities. So villages and towns that were not ever ultimately on railroads basically disappeared. The ones that were on the railroads became huge cities and today are still huge cities. So the railroad industry in the late 1800s. We're going to pick up from there the next time I see you. Oh no, I'm just kidding. The railroad industry became a dominant government-supported economic force in the late 1800s, created jobs, created lots of millionaires, and provided an infrastructure that further bound the nation together. That was what I was telling you about, is that as much as I think that they were robber barons and terrible and horrible for normal human beings, they did create the infrastructure that made us a world power. So, robber baron, captain of industry, you decide. There we go. The railroad industry was the biggest American industry of the 1800s because it created the most jobs and economic growth. You have to know the 19th century has technological advances. You have to know that it has the Transcontinental Railroad met in Promontory Point, Utah in 1869. 5 more transcontinental railroads after that. People can now ship their produce. They can ship their livestock. They can ship things all over the country, including themselves. As a result, the whole interior of the country is being filled up with people that are moving out west. Do not forget that is very much at the expense of the Native Americans that up until this time had still just been being pushed more and more and more west. And so with the transcontinental railroads and the other ones that came along, it's all but over for them by 1887, the Dawes Act that we talked about last class, and where they had to assimilate, the students were assimilated, they had to get sent to boarding schools, they had to become Christians, they had to learn the language and forget about their own religions and their own identities and their own languages. And then Congress. You have to know that Congress subsidized railroad companies with land and money, but was reluctant to regulate the giant industry itself. So laissez-faire economics, you have to know it, you have to know it, you have to know it. Laissez-faire economics, the big businesses wanted them to be left alone. They want no government regulation. Laissez-faire economics means stay out of it, government, stay out of it, stay out of it, stay out of it. Just let the big businesses run their world, and that is exactly what the Gilded Age is. The captains of industry were way more powerful than many of the presidents, and they got to run their companies the way they wanted. They were barely taxed. They were given free land. They were given government subsidies to be able to build more tracks, to build more. Captains of industry didn't do that on their own, contrary to what people think. They did not do that on their own. They had much, much, much government support. But then despite that, they still treated their workers terribly, paid them terribly. People that wanted to ride the trains, there was unfair. This guy came up to the train and wanted to buy a ticket, and it would cost him $10. Somebody else came up, and oh, she was pretty, it cost her $5. Somebody else came up, they're like, shut up, get out of here, or I'm not giving you a ticket, or you can pay $100. So they could do whatever they wanted to do, because again, laissez-faire economics, that nobody had any regulations put on them. Okay, and then that's it. That's all I got to today. I'm still trying to get through the beginning of the school year things, getting composition books checked off, getting note cards checked and everything else. So that's actually it for today. I hope you guys had a good day, and peace out.